morning. My name is Tiffany Taylor, and I have known the Mymka family for over 46 years when they moved across the street from my family's home on Freeway Circle. Nolana and I became best friends at the age of 18 months, and I'm honored to tell you about Nick Mymka today. Nick was born October 12, 1938 in Asheville, Manitoba, Canada, on his family's farm. He was the second of 5 children born to his parents, Harry and Annie Mymka, and he was the oldest son. Life on the farm was not easy, but he did remember good times. Some of his favorite memories on the farm were riding his bike in the yard, getting electricity finally when he was 12 years old, Sunday dinners after church with their own chickens that made the best meals. One story he was particularly fond of telling was how, when he was 14, he was in the bush with his .22 rifle. He happened to cross a deer, and with one perfect aimed shot, he killed it. He went home to get help as the deer was too big to bring home by himself. At first, his parents did not believe he'd killed a deer with his gun. Come on, a .22, really? His mom finally said, "Show me," and he did, and they brought that deer home together. In his late teens, Nick moved to Dauphin and then found his way to the big city of Winnipeg, Manitoba, where he met his wife, Lorna, on a blind date. They were married in November of 1959, and their son, Bentley, was born 2 years later. Nick was worried that if he stayed in Winnipeg, he would never own his own home. And around the same time, a new president of the United States was elected, and this young, inspiring leader gave Nick and his wife the idea that maybe they should see what the United States had to offer. They took a vacation to Los Angeles the summer of 1963, and that visit helped them decide to move there. 4 months later, they arrived with their toddler and visas in hand in Orange County, and they've never regretted that decision. Nick became a U.S. citizen in 1969. Nick got into construction, working in several locations and ended up moving his family to Merced, California, where he continued in construction, most notably on the Exchequer Dam, Del Valle Dam, and Don Pedro Dam. He drove cement mixers first and then moved on to be a big equipment operator by chance. One day he was asked if he could drive the big equipment. Nick was never one to let an opportunity to go by, so he said yes, even though he couldn't yet control it. He was able to learn quickly and was soon operating different types of big equipment as needed on the job sites. In Merced, Nick became involved in the Lutheran church, where he and Lorna met many lifelong friends, many of whom are here today. They bought their first house in Merced and made a life for themselves that included water skiing on the weekends and having Sunday dinner with friends after church. Water skiing was something both Nick and Lorna enjoyed. Nick could balance and ski on one ski, while Lorna never mastered that ability and always needed 2 skis to ski. In December of 1970, Nick and his family moved to Albuquerque, New Mexico in pursuit of a new job on the Rio Grande River. They lived there only 6 months, but long enough for their daughter Nolana to be born in March of 1971. Shortly after her birth, Nick and his family moved to Sacramento, California, as he was anticipating working on the soon-to-be-built Auburn Dam. While waiting for that job to get started, Nick was hired on at Tiger Construction, where he hauled cement for 30 years. Nick was a Teamster, so when he would move to a new city, he would register as a Teamster and would get jobs through the union. He retired in 2001, still waiting for the Auburn Dam to be built, by the way. At his retirement party, Tiger shared that Nick drove 3 million miles during his 30 years with the company, with no lost time or chargeable accidents. What a great accomplishment. This is the equivalent of 380 times around the equator, or 6 trips to the moon and back. Nick was always clever, thinking of unique ways to address problems. Keep in mind that he only had a high school education, yet he was able to design things using complex geometry and physics principles. Of course, that meant a lot of trial and error at times. Some of his creations were custom kitchen cabinets that included a hidden stool behind a cabinet door on a hinge. This cabinet was built for some friends who had purchased a castle home and rescue. Other creations included a hidden breadboard and pull-out behind drawer fronts, a side gate that swung open using a converted garage door opener, and decorative window wrought iron that prevent anyone from getting in a home and yet allowed anyone to get out in case of an emergency. One of the memories I remember as a child was this wooden Barbie dollhouse Nick made for Nolana around the time we were 7 years old. This dollhouse had 2 stories, had real electric lights, and it was on wheels. Everything Nick made had wheels. Nolana would wheel her Barbie house over to my house so we could play Barbies. After all, my plastic pink Barbie dream house didn't have wheels, nor has it lasted 42 years. Nolana's Barbie house with wheels is still played with today by other little girls. It has definitely held up to the test of time with its durability. Nick's first job was working at a Ford dealership in Winnipeg. That is where his love of Fords began. It continued when his first job in the States was at a Ford dealership in Orange County. Over his lifetime, he owned numerous Fords. His children's first cars were also Fords. For Bentley, it was a 1965 Mustang that he had said he and Bentley could rebuild. Bentley soon learned that this was a pet project for his dad, with him being the gopher for tools and getting the cleanup job at the end of the day. These rebuilds would always cost Bentley a lot of money, and his dad would continuously work on his car. This continued for Nolana with a 1985 Mustang that also needed to be rebuilt, although by then everyone knew it would be Dad's pet project. Nick's granddaughter Sarah's first car was also a Ford, a 2003 Mustang that he fixed up for her. Nick was very vocal about his preference of American-made cars with everyone he knew, including friends of his children. A friend of Nolana's remembers parking her Isuzu in the driveway one day when she came to visit, and being immediately told by Nick that she needed to move her vehicle as only Fords were allowed in his driveway. This incident was shared among all of Nolana's friends, and a few years later, another friend showed up in his brand new Honda Civic. He asked Nick to go out front as he wanted to show him something. The hood was popped, and the friend pointed out big lettering that said "Made in Canada." And then he asked if he could park in the driveway because his car and Nick were both from Canada. Nick laughed and walked away. It's not a Ford. Bentley shared that when his family, Dad found out he bought a Jeep for his family, his dad didn't talk to him for 8 months. Lucky for me, my first car was a Mercury Lynx, which was made by Ford, so I was in good with Nick for a while. Nick's love of fixing up cars wasn't limited to his kids. When he became a Shriner, he refurbished a 1921 fire engine. I remember playing on it with Nolana in the backyard during that time. One fond memory I had of Nick was when he would take Nolana and I to the Shriner Circus every year when they would come to town. We always had a lunch date first, and then off to the circus we would go. I wouldn't realize until years later, when my middle son was born with a spinal birth defect, how important Shriners would be to my family. Nick was very helpful in letting us know how Shriners worked when it came to getting Dylan established as a patient. Nick was proud to personally know a patient that was benefiting from Shriners Hospital. Nick also enjoyed tinkering with toys, especially his kids' toys. One Christmas Eve when Bentley was 4, Santa Claus came early because Nick wanted to put together the toys that were being left under the tree. Bentley was in the bath at the time, and he was so upset that no one came to get him so he could meet Santa. Nick would usually be the first to try out the new toys, especially if they were bikes, although he did leave Nolana's dollhouse alone and just enjoyed watching her play with it. The life of being raised on a farm followed Nick always. His backyard is lined with shade and fruit trees, and he always enjoyed sharing the fruit harvest with family and friends. In 2019 alone, 136 red grapefruit and numerous pounds of burgundy plums were enjoyed by family and friends. When Sarah was little, Grandpa taught her how to bend over while eating plums so that the plum juice dripped on the ground and not on her. Sarah didn't quite understand what bent over meant, so she would squat instead and still got plum juice on her chin. Nick loved gardening and had annual gardens and planted tomatoes, cucumbers, bell peppers, and yellow squash. All the trees in the yard meant a lot of birds, and Nick always enjoyed sitting on the patio and listening to the songs of mockingbirds and watching the hummingbirds feed while he would sit or nap on the patio. but he did take exception to the blue squirrels and other animals that would help themselves to the fruit and vegetables. Nick loved to take his grandkids to the donut shop. They'd go in the back and play with dough while Nick visited and enjoyed a cup of coffee. Mo always made sure to throw the dough away that the kids played with, even though the kids thought they were making donuts. Nick was not afraid of heights, and this came in handy when he began having grandchildren. When my son Drew was 3, he would throw terrible tantrums about going to preschool. Grandpa Mymka sat him down and made a deal. If he could go 2 weeks without any tantrums, Grandpa would take him up on the roof with him. Drew was so excited, he behaved himself just so he could go up on the roof. Drew also earned the privilege of Grandpa Mymka taking him to sit in his big work truck. Drew talked about that big truck for months after that special visit. When Sarah was about the same age, Grandpa let her climb with him up his 14-foot ladder so she could see over the house. He also hung a swing from the big tree in the backyard, and Sarah and later Simon and Evan would swing as high as they could get Grandpa to push them. One Sunday, when the twins were toddlers, Bentley and Lori dropped the boys off at Grandma and Grandpa's house for the afternoon, but Grandma was still at church. Nick took care of those twins till Lorna got home. Those boys certainly kept Nick busy as they ran opposite ways throughout the whole house. Nick loved being a grandpa. Nick will always be known as the Donut Man, as he loved to spend his time during retirement visiting and taking donuts to his friends. If he did business with you, you were pretty much guaranteed at least one visit from him with a box of donuts. And some places he visited weekly included Folsom Lake Ford, Future Ford, of course, Perfection Home Systems, and Roseville Auto Wreckers. Nick and Lorna made several trips to Hawaii over the years, once for their 25th wedding anniversary and then later for a nephew's wedding. It was described that Nick loved playing in the ocean whenever he visited Hawaii. Nick surprised Lorna with a 50th wedding anniversary trip to Branson, Missouri, Memphis, Tennessee, and Nashville, Tennessee, where he also surprised her by having her brother and his wife, Victor and Lorraine, meet them for vacation. Their whole trip was organized by Nick, and he planned tours of all the sites. Nick was particularly fond of Graceland. Nick died at home unexpectedly Monday evening, February 3rd. He had been enjoying a glass of wine and watching the evening news. He got a second glass, and before he could finish it, God took him home. He leaves a big hole behind in the lives of those he knew, but we were all grateful that when he died, it was quick and at home, and he was not alone. Nick's family finds it fitting that when the funeral home came to pick him up that Monday evening, they were in a Ford van. In closing, I would like to share with you a memory that Bentley and Nolana's cousin, Rhea, remembers from 1976 when she and her family were visiting Sacramento from Ear Falls, Ontario, Canada. I kept on your dad, trying to convince him that you all needed to move closer, like to Ear Falls. I remember telling him things to convince him. You guys are too far. It's too hot here. We have schools in Ear Falls. Each time he would come up with something new. He would tell me why it was good to stay here. He liked the heat. His job was here. The kids liked their school, etc., etc. This was an ongoing dialogue for a few days. Finally, he said, "Is the real reason because when you go home, you will miss us?" I started to cry and agreed that that was the reason. He got down on my level and talked to me about family, that it didn't matter how far we lived from each other, we would always, always be family. And when I missed family, I just had to remember the good times and know that I would always have those memories. Nick didn't show his love often, but when he did, he showed it in a big way. We will all do our best to remember what Nick said. We must remember the good times and know that we will always have the memories of him, the husband, father, grandpa, brother, brother-in-law, uncle, and friend. Thank you so much for coming today.